it's about performance. Oh, it's about performance. Yes, it's about performance. It's about performance back on the job.
Hi, this is Guy Wallace, and this is the Pursuing Performance Podcast. Welcome. If the front end of your approach to instructional development or learning development or training development of either performance guides, otherwise known as job aids, or learning experiences, known in the past as training or education, if that front end is skipping the pre-analysis activities that I've labeled in my methodology going back to the 1980s as project planning and kickoff, phase one in all of my approaches, that leads to phase two analysis in all of my approaches, and then it leads on to phases 3, 4, 5, and 6, design, then development, then pilot testing, and then finally revision and release. I think skipping this most critical of the early front-end steps prior to conducting any analysis is a huge mistake and therefore a huge opportunity. It involves the intake process and then developing a draft project plan and a proposal, in my case, which is where we park the price tag for our projects that we were proposing to the client. And therefore, the proposal would be kept somewhat secret to those with a need to know only. And the project plan itself, which gave all the details as to why we were doing this, who was going to be involved, what were we going to do, and what was the schedule, that could be socialized, shared with everybody appropriate. A well-drafted project plan is based on a well-done intake process where a request comes in one way or another, however that works in your organization, and then it's assessed perhaps in your organization to meeting certain criteria. Otherwise, it's, the answer is no, we can't support you because it doesn't meet these specific criteria. Or there is no formal acceptance criteria, and so therefore a judgment has to be made as to whether or not you're going to do it or not, and who's going to pay for what, the whole thing or part of it, or how does that work in your organization. But anyway, the intake process clarifies the request, identifies the requester, identifies the stakeholders, identifies the target audiences for this learning product to be produced, TBD. And one of the things that I do in this intake process is sometimes interview the other stakeholders who are usually the managers of the target audience. I'm trying to get a little bit up in the food chain, so to speak, and make sure I'm dealing with stakeholders to understand the business worthiness of this request, because perhaps they will make the decision at some point that we shouldn't do it, or we should stop what we're doing and go do something else. Those are business decisions left best to the stakeholders involved. Now, sometimes the requester is simply a middleman, if you will, middlewoman, coming from the person who really has asked for this service, and they're therefore the messenger, and so therefore they may not have all the background that you would need for a project plan. So if they're coming and asking for this service on behalf of somebody else, you may need to go to that original requester and clarify something with them. I mean, the point is to get totally aligned, understand what the expectations are. Not that you're going to meet them necessarily. But we want to make sure that we're all on the same page as to what the request is and what's behind the request. I mean, is it for new hires? I have a little saying that a request for learning and development to address the needs of new hires should be expected. A request to address performance problems should be suspected. Nonetheless, you take the request and develop a project plan. Now, not all organizations do formal project planning But I think it would give you a strategic advantage to go to your client, to go to the other people and say, here's the plan, here's the dates on the plan. We can get it done in this time frame if everything goes to plan. If it does not, of course, there's what's known as slippage. And all the dates, it takes you longer to get to any particular milestone, and then it takes you longer to be done with the whole thing. Something else that we want to clarify before we do the project planning is about this target audience or audiences. Are they a particular job title? Are they people who work in a particular process? Is it across a department? Is it across all the function? Is it across the entire enterprise? How do we scope the target audience so we can begin to determine what is it that we want them to be able to do in the future that they cannot do now? And can some of them do it now? Are there master performers out there who are performing at a high level and we wish everybody could perform to their levels? What's behind this request, and what's in the target audience? And what can we safely assume about the target audience? The key thing I'm trying to get done in this first phase is to get an approved project plan. So I do the intake process, I do the draft project plan, and then I take it to a kickoff meeting with the client and the key stakeholders, and I call them the project steering team, and we would then be in the first of several, 4 in my methodology, gate review meetings, where the gate is closed and we can't go any further until we do a review and we get any changes that are necessary, and we finally get approved to go on to the next phase, and the gate comes up, and there we go through that. I represent that gate review meeting as an upside-down traffic light, not a stoplight, but a go light in my imagery for my process. Then getting back into the project steering team gate review meeting for this first phase, project planning and kickoff. What I'm doing is walking the team through the project plan, and I've told them up front they have 4 options. And those options are, number 1, kill this project because it doesn't make any business sense. Number 2, modify the project plan because it's inappropriate for some reason and there's a better way to do it as seen by the project steering team and the client, and that's who we're working for, of course. Option 3 is to defer the project because that group of people sees that something else needs to happen before we start this project. So maybe the project is needed and worthy, but it's not timely, and so we need to go on hold, if you will. The 4th option is to approve this project plan as perhaps amended in that review meeting, and then resource it. And this is what I'm really going for. I want the right people to do the right things at the right times in my later phases of analysis, design, development, pilot testing, and then in revision and release. That's the goal. Get the right people to do the right things at the right time per the project plan, which is structured along those phases of mine, the 6 phases for instructional development or learning development or training development, etc., etc. Now, we're working for the representatives of the business that I call the project stakeholders on the project steering team. It's not the client. It's not the requester. These are the people whose numbers, business-wise, will improve, theoretically, if we improve the performance of their people 2 or 3 or more levels down to the workers in the workforce, the performers. We sometimes call them learners. Each one of these gate review meetings that I have is intended to allow the project steering team, the stakeholders, we're working for them, to review what we've just done and then to talk about and approve what we're going to do going forward. I mean, perhaps we need different people, perhaps we need different resources, etc. So we're always adjusting to in the moment's best knowledge, understanding, insights into what we're trying to do within the greater context of the enterprise or even the value chain or the world at large. But I'm really looking for the right master performers and other subject matter experts to be involved in the analysis phase and the design phase, And I don't talk about it a lot, but in truth, we'll need them for the development phase, and we'll need a whole crop of new master performers and typical learners when we go into the pilot testing phase. And so I need to make sure that the client sees this as business worthy of the investment, of the time and the money of everybody that's going to be involved, that's going to be consumed as resources as we conduct this project. They see the promise of ROI, and we may or may not have calculated that based on saying this is the process, these are the current numbers, we can double the speed, improve the yield, and reduce the costs. That's a math problem, and we can get the CFO organization in to help us do the algorithm that meets their requirements and project, which was ROI was all about in the first place, projecting what will this project do versus other projects. So if we can't afford everything, what things should we focus our time, attention, and limited resources on? In the past, I've shared the task lists for my project phases, including phase 1. That's back in my 1999 book, Lean-ISD. It was addressed in newsletters going back into the early 1990s from my consulting firms. And I've shared example outputs for phase 1. What does a project plan really look like? And what's the slide deck for meeting with the project steering team? I've got some of those kinds of examples on my professional archive site, something that I created when I retired so that I could clean up all the resources in my previous sites and blogs and get them all in one central place where I can kind of manage them, if you will. So I've been doing this kind of work with a performance orientation based on the work of Gary Rumler back in the 1960s and 1970s, and in 1979, I was taught a derivative of his approach to performance-based instruction, or performance-based training, or today, performance-based learning. I mean, it's really not all about learning. It's all about the performance of the learners back on the job when they are performers. And I was lucky to have been taught the Gary Rumler approach, a derivative of a derivative. Well, that was in my first company, Wicks Lumber, back in 1979. But then in 1981, I joined Motorola, and I got to work with Gary Rumler. He was my consultant, and as the joke went, that meant I carried his pencils around as we went from each of my client sites across North America to the next. And I was serving manufacturing, materials, and purchasing organizations within all the Motorola business units and in the factories, manufacturing facilities, if you will, of Motorola back then. And there were over 30 of them. What I learned from Rumler was analysis and how to use that in design. What I learned about project planning, I learned from my business partner after Motorola, the late Ray Svensson. He had a template that I simply used and edited for my next project based on whatever we had gotten in the formal or informal intake process. I mean, you might get a request for proposal, a request for quote, and everything is all spelled out for you. And as a vendor, you have to respond to that. And you may look at that and go, okay, this is silly. They've decided the performance-based learning objectives before they've done any analysis. So these are people's best guesses. If I get into this project, will I be able to have a chance to affect those and modify those based on the analysis data? Or are they expecting me to simply jump into design, or are they expecting me to jump even further and start with development and sans design, sans analysis, sans any project planning that makes sense to the business, so that the business can identify, handpick, if you will, the human resources, the people, the master performers, and the other subject matter experts that are required for your success, for the learning product's success, and for the project stakeholders' success. So I fully believe that the first steps of any instructional development project, regardless of what model that you use, if you're not doing something akin to my project planning and kickoff, where you have a formal or informal intake process that generates the data that you need for the project plan based on the project planning templates and examples that are done in your organization that are acceptable in your culture, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You either have a formal plan that you hand the client, or what I say is I'd always have that formal plan. It's in my back pocket. You want to see it, I'll be glad to show it to you, but you're counter project planning in your culture here at this enterprise. So therefore, I've got to do it for me, for my sanity, to manage the project, because I'm going to manage to a plan, not to a whim or a bunch of thoughts or whatever comes up next. I would rather be proactive than reactive. And that's why this project planning phase and getting it resourced with the right people to do the right things at the right times on a project that is deemed business worthy. So at the end of this first kickoff meeting, the gate review meeting of phase 1, when my clients have those 4 options to kill the project, to modify the project plan, to defer the project, or to approve the project and resource it so that we can get on with it and have an impact to performance sooner rather than later. Thank you for listening.
It's about performance. Oh, it's about performance. Yes, it's about performance. It's about performance back on the job. It's about performance.